Hello everyone, this is Lucky. Welcome to another episode of Learn With Me series, Hematology Part 2. So today we'll be dealing with bleeding disorders. So let's get started. Bleeding disorders. So before that, moving on to the MCQs, let me give you some basic knowledge. This is a blood vessel, and if this is a cut, primarily some platelets will come here and aggregate platelets with the help of von Willebrand factor, and this structure is called primary hemostatic plug. And after some time, clotting factors will come here and stabilize the wound, and this structure with the help of clotting factors is called secondary hemostatic plug. Next we'll have to know few terms: BT, CT, PT and APTT. BT means bleeding time. So if there is one cut in my skin, the time taken to stop the bleeding is called bleeding time. Next is the clotting time, CT. This experiment is already done. Probably almost everyone has done this experiment in physiology lab. You take small capillaries and insert blood into it and break fragments of it at few intervals of time, and at some point of time you will notice blood strings. So it is called clotting time. PT is prothrombin time. It is equal to extrinsic pathway plus common pathway. Extrinsic pathway is factor 7 and common pathway consists of factor 10, 5, 2 and 1. If you want deep knowledge about these clotting factors and coagulation pathway, make sure you watch my previous video, Hematology Part 1. There I have included coagulation factors and coagulation pathway and clotting factors in depth. Make sure you watch that video. Alright. Next is APTT. APTT means activated partial thromboplastin time. It is equal to intrinsic pathway. That means intrinsic pathway consists of factor 12, factor 11, factor 9 and factor 8 plus common pathway which consists of factor 10, 5, 2 and 1. Alright. Bleeding time taken to stop the primary bleed. Clotting time taken for the blood to clot. Prothrombin time, extrinsic pathway plus common pathway. Activated partial thromboplastin time consists of intrinsic pathway plus common pathway. So these were the terms you will need to know. Let's move on to some questions. So in the questions you will get values on BT, PT, CT, PT and APTT. Let's suppose that BT is normal, CT is increased, PT is also increased and APTT is normal. If BT is increased, that means there are probably a defect in platelets or von Willebrand factor, but this is normal, so there is no defect in platelets and von Willebrand factor. Clotting time is elevated, so probably there is a chance of defect in clotting factors. So there may be mostly, alright, there is much chance there is a defect in clotting factors. And we know prothrombin time determines what? It determines extrinsic pathway and common pathway, and APTT signifies intrinsic pathway plus common pathway. Since APTT is normal, that means intrinsic factor is normal, also common pathway is normal, that means this common pathway is also normal. So there is a defect in extrinsic pathway. That means clotting factor is defect and extrinsic pathway is defective. That means which factor is defective here? There is a defect in factor 7. 7 is an extrinsic pathway factor, clotting factor. That means there is a defect in factor 7. I hope you understand this thing. Secondly, we take another example, BT, CT, PT and APTT. If BT is normal, CT is elevated, PT is normal and APTT is elevated. If BT is normal, that means platelets and von Willebrand factor is normal. If CT is elevated, that means von Willebrand factor, alright. If CT is normal, that elevated, that means there is a clotting factor defect. The which clotting factor defect? This one. This signifies intrinsic pathway. The intrinsic pathway, which are the factors in intrinsic pathway? We have factor 12, we have factor 11, and then 9 and 8. So these are the factors that may be defective. In the previous video, I already told you anti-hemophilic factors. So factor 8 is anti-hemophilic factor A, factor 9 is anti-hemophilic factor B, and factor 11 is anti-hemophilic factor C. So most likely there may be a hemophilia present in this question. So for this question to get answer, we have to know another two things: family history. We have to know the family history, which will be given in the question. So if the family history is positive with bleeding on trauma, especially in the joints, that means most likely it would be a hemophilia A or hemophilia B. And if there is a absence of family history with a bleeding on trauma, especially in the joints, then most likely it will be a hemophilia C. If it is hemophilia A, there will be factor 8 deficiency defect. If there is hemophilia B, it means 9 defect. If C, it is 11 defect. I hope you understand this question. Let's move on to another question so you get to know. Let's just give some tough question, a hard question on question number 3. BT, CT, PT and APTT. If BT is elevated, CT is also elevated, but PT is normal and APTT is elevated. Okay, the BT is elevated, CT is elevated, it signifies there may be a defect in von Willebrand factor defect. And since PT is normal, that means extrinsic factor is alright. APTT is normal, that means intrinsic factor may be a cause. With these two signify intrinsic factor defect plus von Willebrand factor defect. So this thing, we come to the conclusion that there is a factor 8 defect since von Willebrand factor is a carrier of factor 8. That's why the answer will be factor 8 defect. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you understand whatever I had to say. And if you have any questions, make sure you drop it down in the comment section below, and please follow and subscribe to my channel. Let's go.